tell us how you connected with this study. I'm very curious. I know all of you have minds that just don't stop, and Todd Pickett has already demonstrated that. Man, you how do you do that? You know? Yes. No. Oh, you know. Man, you really got some great stuff out of this book, and I can't wait to hear what the rest of y'all gleaned. Jump in. The most passionate one wins. Go ahead.
Just quickly.
Who knows?
Says on.
There you go. Thanks.
It says on. It's got a little light. I think I connected a little Woody Allen-ly, kind of just there kind of some neuroticism coming out, and identify that. So the most immediate visceral connection was saying, "Oh yeah, I did that. Oh, I listened to that too. Am I supposed to listen? I don't know. Is it weird? Is it okay to listen to that stuff? I'm not sure." And so I had a bit of a sort of schizoid connection, going back and forth, identifying, finding fault with this, sort of joining Brett in the things that he was critical of. Also, I earmarked the point where I said, whenever you go to Disneyland again with your friends, I want to come. There's this part in the book where he recounts going to Disneyland with friends after church, and they synchronized songs on their iPods with different rides. It just sounds incredibly fun and incredibly cool. So that was one of the things which, as I was reading, I think part of how I felt a little bit claimed by it, and how I still feel a little unsettled and just even a little unsure, is sort of I recognized a lot of this, and I quickly sort of recognized the need to push back on some of this, and I also not always quite sure what to do with it. So I can spot times when I am just completely complicit in this desire to be seen and desire to be cool. But then there's all sorts of the rest of sort of our daily behavior. So I found myself thinking, should I stop caring what kind of ties I wear? Or it's just sort of mundane, but I think I so much of, in one sense, this is a book about how we do church and how we think about reaching out and how we invite people into church. But there are all sorts of implications for just how I live, what I do wear, what I do listen to. And I think that's one of the pieces where I found myself still a little unsure what is just differences of taste, and what is just exciting because it's new, and then where am I becoming? No, I'm just becoming a snob, and I'm excluding people. And
that's funny. It made me weirdly conscious of what is a hipster, because I'm still not sure. And when Brett said, "Yeah, Biola, we've got some hipsters," I go, he's got the ability to identify them when he sees them. You know.
And I don't think Brett is saying think of the only listen to. Really bad music, or wear clothes. I had a friend in college who he wanted to really take Jesus' call seriously to live simply and to not live for yourself, and so he wore the nastiest clothes you could imagine intentionally because he wanted to follow Jesus in that. And I think he was doing something good, but I think that was a little bit too literalistic. And so that's just some of the things I try to.
In some ways, this struck me in the same way a book I read a lot of years ago by D.A. Carson called Exegetical Fallacies. I read this book and it ruined my church experience for years, because I could identify a pastor's fallacy in his sermon in Latin, and it was terrible. So I had to overcome that. But now I'm on the hunt for hipsters, not just hipsters, but wannabe hipsters. And I've discovered a new category: wannabe hipsters. So. Yeah, your reactions to the book, gentlemen.
Well, I was really eager to read this book, and for a long time now, I've wanted to read something that helps me think about this phenomenon I've been watching for a while. And experiences like this, I was out at Taylor University last year and was having breakfast with a bunch of students. And Taylor University wouldn't rate high on the hipster scale. I mean, they're out in the fields, right? And so. But still, they're Christian college students who come from different places. So I'm having breakfast with them, and we got talking about music. And the student said to one of the guys, hey, who do you like to listen to? And he paused and he was anxious and he said, well, I don't care. I like Coldplay. And I thought, what was that all about? And I said, unpack that for me. And he said, everybody likes Coldplay, and so to like them just isn't cool. And I said, but they're good, right? Yeah, well, but you're not really supposed to like them because everybody does. And I said, wow, that's fascinating to me. And so I said, all right, reading this book is going to be great for me because it's going to help me understand that breakfast conversation so many others I'm having. Well, so I went into it eager to read it, but I need to tell you, Brett, it was such a good book that it ended up having a really deep effect on me. And actually, for the majority of the time I was reading it, I was really sad. In spite of the really good humor and insightful critiques, I ended up being sad most of the time I was reading it. And it's because I saw so much attention to the external and the shallow and appearances. And I was, like Todd was saying, I was thinking, okay, well, it's easy to point out a guy who's just flamboyantly hipster and point out how he's doing it, but what are the ways I'm doing that? I've been doing it since I was 10, right? But the whole time I was reading the book, I couldn't stop thinking of 1 Corinthians 1 and 2, where Paul says, consider your calling, brothers. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. Not many were powerful. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring not to nothing things that are, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God. He is the source of your life in Christ Jesus, whom God made our wisdom and our righteousness and sanctification and redemption. Therefore, as it is written, let one who boasts boast in the Lord. And I, when I came to you, brothers, did not come proclaiming to you the testimony of God with lofty speech or wisdom, for I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified, and I was with you in weakness and in fear and much trembling, and my speech and my message were not in plausible words of wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power, that your faith might not rest in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God. And what intensified the sadness for me is that, as Craig said, I'm a pastor at a church, and we're in a pretty intense time of difficult things at our church. Marriage is in crisis, and people dealing with disease, and really difficult things, a lot of heartbreak, a lot of difficulty, and even in my own family as I'm trying to father two girls who were orphans 2 years ago and 8 months ago, and so a lot of difficulty at home. And so when you're at the bedside of a dying person, the kind of jeans you wear is ridiculous to be thinking about. And when you're trying to get two girls to stop seeing themselves as orphans and rather children of God and of our family, you know, your cool haircut as sort of the evangelism tool you're going to use and display Christianity in a way that's appealing to people. What does it mean to follow the one who had nothing in his appearance to attract us to him? Nothing in his superficial appearance, Isaiah 53 says, that draws us to him. I mean, when he claimed messiahship, the people in Nazareth were appalled at the suggestion because he was so normal looking and unimpressive externally. And so I kept contrasting this temptation we all have to impress with appearance, and thought about it in my own life and how in the church we're consumed with being cool. And it really was heartbreaking for me to read it. And it's so disturbing time and time again. And I kept thinking, well, who are the people who really have shown me Christ in my life? And I got to tell you, they were really uncool people. The people who were most important in my life, I think of a guy named Robert Coleman. If you ask Robert Coleman, I've done it, what kind of car do you drive? He'd say, oh, it's blue. He's not impressing anybody with his car. A guy named Lyle Dorset was eccentric and wonderfully in love with Jesus after a late-in-life conversion, and nobody would say he's cutting it. I remember sitting behind him in chapel at Wheaton one time when I was there, and somebody referred to Roseanne Barr from in front of chapel, and I saw Lyle lean over to his wife and go, "Who's Roseanne?" And I thought, oh, how wonderfully refreshing That's somebody who's referred to by their first name in the 90s that everybody knew Lyle was clueless about. But you know what? He was saving kids off the streets in Mexico and leading them to Jesus. That's cool from a Christian perspective, but not from a worldly perspective, because he doesn't know who Roseanne Barr is. And so I thought of all these people, even the non-Christian people who had an impact on my life. Lothar Kahn, who taught me humanities at my state university, whose hair was wildly messed up, and not because he tried to make it look that way, but because it just was, because he was oblivious to it. And so these people, time after time, Dr. Scheinblum, my biology teacher, and Dr. Beeching, who just loved to hold away in his study and read great books, these people were hopelessly uncool, but amazingly influential in my life because they really were living for things that mattered. And so I thought of all these people, and then I thought of Jesus again, who had nothing in his appearance, and I thought, what are we doing? Chasing after wind and calling it relevance, when at the end of the day, it leaves us hopelessly empty. And there's so many great quotes from the book I'd love to read that brought these stinging critiques of my own desire for coolness and the church's desire for coolness into picture. So just a couple things. Brett has a chart that really summarizes it beautifully here in the book, where he contrasts Christianity with hipsterdom. And it's on page 199. And he's got all these great contrasting things. Self-obsession with selflessness. Vanity with being altruistic and giving. Self-sovereignty over submitting to God. Being exclusive over inclusive. Elitist over humble. Alienating over inviting. Transient over transcendent. And so these great things, but the two that really stuck out to me was ironic is what cool is, and earnest is what Christians are. And jaded is what cool is, and hopeful is what Christians are. I thought, how contrasting. In the way I feel as a pastor and a prof, especially working with young people a lot, the most difficulty is in those two categories. I think my young students are terrified of appearing like they're trying too hard. There's a fear of being earnest and eager and enthusiastic, because that's not cool. But Christians are people who believe in good news of great joy and are called to proclaim it from the rooftops. So how does that fit with the need to be cool in my detached, unenthusiastic, I'll be the judge of that sort of mentality. And this mentality to be consumed with myself and narcissistic is just so antithetical to the Christian worldview. So let me just read this quote from 238 that I think is so on the money. Brett says this: Christianity humbles us, something that the pursuit of cool never does. To live a life of fashion and trend-setting desirability is to obstinately refuse to cower to the reality of one's smallness. Oh, is that good? That's the neediness that Todd was talking about. But in the dark recesses and unpolished anxieties of every hipster's life is an abiding, deeply troubling recognition that the coolest we could ever be, we're talking David Bowie, Miles Davis, Bob Dylan cool, still doesn't make up for lingering existential dilemmas such as, say, mortality. That's funny and powerful. At the end of the day, every hipster knows in his heart this one unfortunate truism, that he who dies with the most hip still dies. That's right on the money. That cool is not about eternal things, life and death things, heaven and hell things, the things Christians should be thinking about all the time. And so I'm so thankful for this book, because I do think very even-handedly, pointing out the good things. I spent this whole weekend finishing up this book with a dear friend from our Wheaton days, at a church that from all external appearances would seem like it's trying to be so cool. And to be there with their candles and their liturgy and their monastic music, but a cool worship band, you'd say, oh, they're just hipsters. No, they're not. They're doing things that appear to be cool, but it's theologically driven. It's coming out of a life of this brother who's had one child die and another one fight leukemia for 3 years. This is anything but some shallow effort to be cool. This is driven by substance and theology. So I love the even-handedness of it, just like Brett did today, pointing out the good stuff and the tough stuff. So it connected a lot of points. Those are some of them. And I'll shut up.
Well, I want to hear from Stan Jantz, who's a very cool guy because he's a grandfather of the cutest grandkids I've ever seen on Facebook, and he's also very technologically savvy. You know, I don't want to get in the same computer room with him. Stan, what did you think of the book?
Well, thank you, and I appreciate being included here. I started at Biola 40 years ago last month, and cool back then was reading Francis Schaeffer and listening to the Beatles' White Album, both of which are still around, by the way. So it shows there are some timeless things, but there are some other goofy things I won't even mention that we did. But what I think is really valuable, I'll make a couple of comments. My whole life I've been about content, either selling books, writing books, or publishing books. And one of the passions that drives me, and I think this is really true of anybody who deals in content, is to be able to identify, and God has privileged me in some ways, maybe even helped to encourage talented content generators. And so whether it's in, you mentioned the arts, Brett, of really a focus on art for art's sake and not just trying to be kitschy. And I think in what I really have enjoyed about Brett, and as I've watched him as a writer in the last 3 years with this book coming out, but also what he does for the Biola magazine, we're just so thrilled that he's a part of Biola, that he is just a darn good writer. And I would just encourage anybody who aspires to be effective and aspires not just to be hip, but to be relevant in a good way, in the good definition of that word, to be contextual in terms of delivering content that people really want to access. They want to read it, they want to listen to it, they want to view it. And you just have to get really good at your craft. And this is an outstanding craftsman of words. And I just love, you did a blog the other day that the last sentence was it was a blog about Lady Gaga, of all things. And that last sentence, I'll be some of my content, was just like, it was just so brilliant. I almost wept reading it. It was so good. And I think being a craftsman of words, and whether you ever write a book or you just keep a blog, or maybe a diary that nobody reads, a journal, I just encourage to read this just for the sake of reading what a good book is like. And I think the second thing is I looked at my experience growing up, and I am the epitome of the Christian subculture. My family owned and operated a chain of Christian bookstores. Remember those back in the day? When if you needed this, you went to the local retail Christian bookstore, and then you'd find it there, and with all the other music and stuff, and the Thomas Kincaid pictures and all that. So I did that. I came to Biola. I worked in Christian publishing. So I'm like, I've been in this ghetto my whole life, and I mean that in a very, nice way. I mean, I like the ghetto, but what's really good about certainly Biola in the last 10, 12 years since I've become associated again, not as a student, but as a board member, and both my children went here, is the way it's pushing people out of this comfort, this Biola bubble, as they still call it that, out of the ghetto, into the world, not to be of it, but to be in it, and to bring skills to that world that really demonstrate just how Christ has gifted people in different ways. And I think what this book does too is it helps it's kind of like holding up a mirror to the culture, in this case the Christian subculture, and that's what a good critic does, in a way that's fair and yet is deeply honest. And so for the Christian culture to read, so I really can't think of anything right now out there that would be a better reflection of who we really are and what the prescriptions are for us to do better. And so, Brett, I just applaud you for that, and I just look forward. And I've encouraged him. I said, you have got a great career ahead of you. And maybe this is a bad comparison, but if you ever read Malcolm Gladwell, he wrote Blink and Outliers. That kind of a person that's able to take something and just turn it around and analyze it, look at it in a really thorough and honest way, and hold it up to the culture and say, this is what we're about. And we can learn from that. And I think there's a great history of those kind of critics that are very valuable. Not critical, but critique of where we are. And I think we have great hope. And I agree with you, Erik, that there is a certain sadness that we've been through this, but the hope is that we can do better. And through Christ's help and the enabling of the Holy Spirit. So I'm really hopeful. And I think a lot of what lies ahead are people that are yet undiscovered in their talent and their giftedness to be able to create that kind of art that people really want to look at, not just because it's Christian, but because it's good. And then Christ will come out through that. So Great job.
Well, let me see if I can summarize all that's been said tonight. Yes, hipsters are like slinkies, not really good for anything. Right? But they bring a smile to your face when you push them down the stairs. Am I catching on? No, okay. Yeah, Eric's like, oh my goodness, this man needs counseling. Actually, I'm only here just to keep things going. Ask Brett questions, ask each other questions, interact with each other as much as you'd like. If you need me to throw some stuff, I got a couple of pages of things I can get you going with. In fact, I got a fun one right up. Who's the greater hipster, Dallas Willard or Francis Schaeffer?
Oh, the knickers.
I knew. Okay. Yeah.
And the goatee.
See, he's got the whole, the whole Switzerland shtick. Yeah. That's. Oh no. But on a more serious basis, with Francis Schaeffer, I'm curious because this is a big part of the emergent church. It's been a part of the coolest interest to attract people, to draw people in. Because of his goatee and his knickers and his chalet in the Swiss Alps, Francis Schaeffer was able to connect with people that the rest of us, maybe Dallas Willard at USC, couldn't connect with. You don't have to comment on that. I'm just getting going.
I mean, that's a huge, because I feel like I couldn't agree more with Brett in terms of the basic critique, and we were talking earlier. I mean, he's got a deep appreciation for most things hipster, and shares a lot of sort of taste and stuff like that. But I keep finding myself wondering, well, okay, not all this stuff is bad. Really good music. In fact, a lot of what makes the cooler music these days cool is that it's really good, and Brett points that out. That part of it is because no one knows about it, so it's secret. So if you know about it, it's really, really cool. There's a group right now called The Bird and the Bee, who if you know about them, you're already kind of hip. And they have got this album. It's called something like Revisiting the Masters Volume 1. It's this big title, and it's sort of meant to, we are going to look at this great tradition and revisit it. And it's an album of cover songs of Hall & Oates. Which is a joke. Like that's a joke there, but it's a joke that not everyone gets because a lot of people think, oh, Hall & Oates, they're kind of cool. They're a cool group from the '80s, Erik Thoennes thinks they're a cool group. I'm just reporting here. I'm not dogging. Bird and the Bee is dogging Hall & Oates. So there are all these things. By the way, it's great music, but it's completely ironic. There's no soul. There's none of this sense of earnest in that. So on the one hand, I want to say, I don't want to be earnestless. I don't want to be someone who is always covering myself and hiding and keeping in where cool has become cooled because I'm afraid of the heat of intimacy. I don't want to be that. But this is really good music. It sounds really good. I don't want to just like it because some people like it and because it's a secret cool thing. But it's also really good. And so there's a bit of that rub. A couple days ago, I went over to my neighbor's house, a guy who's not a believer and who I've become fast friends with. He's a great guy, and one of the ways we've really connected is musical taste. And frankly, I think part of why I have a shared musical taste with him is at least some of the time I've got one eye on what cool people think are cool, partly because I've got a sin problem. Partly because I actually trust that those cool people probably have listened to a lot more music and have some sense of that. So I do find it a complicated kind of thing. I think it'd be a shame if the slinky thing, if our main response to hipsters was, what the heck is wrong with you? I don't think that's what we want it to be, but it could become that you all, you're just spiritually mature or spiritually bankrupt. So maybe, a question that I've got in my mind, and Brett, maybe you want to say a little bit, is I'm thinking, what does it look like? So one way we don't love hipsters, at least as a church sort of en masse, is we don't design everything to be cool. Because that's going to be out of date before we start it. It's a failed project. But what it would look like for me to love a hipster in the name of Jesus. Do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, first of all, just to the whole point about good taste, I think it is true, and I say this in the book and in various articles, hipsters do have good taste, and the fact is the music that they like, however trendy it may be, it is good, and they like it because it's good quality, and we should appreciate and value that. And I think C.S. Lewis in his essay, The Inner Ring, really helped me to think through like the good, cool versus the bad. And he talks about, all men strive to be on the inside rather than the outside of the inner ring. But the people on the inner ring aren't necessarily bad if they're in that inner ring just by virtue of the fact that they like things genuinely and they appreciate certain culture and certain art, and it just so happens to be appealing and cool in the view side of outsiders. So it's what's negative about cool is the striving for it, for the power and like the being exclusionary aspect. You want to like the right music because you'll be in a place of power, and that's why you attribute value to it, and that's where it gets negative. And that's but to like something because it's good is a great thing, and I think we are supposed to cultivate taste and appreciation for the good things and good art and good culture. But to the point about how to deal with hipsters and how do we as the church kind of associate with them, I think there's different ways that churches approach it. And on one hand, you find churches that try too hard and they cater everything to the cool kids, and that never works because the cool kids are always going to be a few steps ahead of any pastor or leader who's trying to catch up, and it's going to look clunky and awkward for the churches to be trying to catch the cool. But if you are a church leader and you're a pastor and you're what you're doing is honestly trying to understand and to cultivate your own taste, and not trying to look at the hipster and catch what they have, but to look at yourself and try to understand what moves me in culture and art, and how do I cultivate a finer sensibility of that. That'll ultimately kind of bridge the gap between you and the hipsters, to be able to converse on a deeper level that goes beyond like just name dropping the right bands or wearing the right shirts. That's a superficial sort of level of engagement. To be able to talk to them and engage with them on a level of really understanding what they find valuable in these things, and I think that's one way that you can approach it.
Did any of you find is this hipster thing, is it a replay of the seeker-sensitive controversy in some respects? Are we just looking at worship styles and trying to make sense of them and what connects with people?
Yeah, I mean, I think to the extent that seeker-sensitive is trying to look to the culture and what they want and adjust the church as such, I think hipster churches or wannabe cool churches are doing the same sort of thing in a different way. They're not doing it as a mega church. It's not about numbers as much, but it's still about looking to the outsiders and the seekers, in this case the hipsters, and adjusting your services to meet that, whether that means candles or hymns or whatever they think the cool kids want. So yeah, I think there are a lot of similarities.
That video, which is a riot, was that Sunday morning video? Okay, we kind of talked about this before, but I want to hear you say it again. That was done by Catalyst, which is like a hip church, right? The one in Atlanta, Andy Stanley, North Point, yeah, the Catalyst movement came out of North Point. So they did that video kind of as a what? Self-parody, but yet does that make it that they're cool that they did that? And then if it is self-parody, should they change what they're doing, or are they still doing what they made fun of? I guess that's my question. So it's almost like two layers of irony. Does one cancel the other out? I mean, what's the outcome of that finally?
Yeah, I was really fascinated by that video, and because I think on one hand they're very ironically trying to make fun of themselves, but also kind of pointing as that's not us, that's the bad type of Christianity, and we're somehow above that, and we're cool enough to make fun of it. But you're right, like they continue to kind of live into these patterns and these ideas of flashy services and tattoos as a sign of edginess or whatever. So yeah, it's a tactic that you can use to distance yourself in some way from the connotations of Christianity that you find unseemly, or you think the culture finds unseemly, and it's a way to distance yourself from that and portray yourself as not that church. But in a way that they still are. So it's kind of an interesting thing.
You know, getting back to the question of the positives of hipsters, you know, it strikes me that maybe the one antidote, I mean, I must say that the word cool conjures to me self-consciousness. It's hard for me to put an entirely positive spin on cool, because for me, cool is always the sideward glance. It's always the feeling that part of the pleasure of cool is my reflection in the eyes of others. But it strikes me when you talk about quality, that hipsters are into quality. If that were in fact the case in any given case, that I just love this music because I love this music. If in fact joy or enjoyment was the total experience, that would be great in any given case. That it wouldn't be, I'm enjoying the view of myself in the eyes of others. I'm enjoying others liking me enjoying this. But if it was really just an enjoyment of this, I just enjoy this unself-conscious enjoyment, well, that would be, we could call that cool. I just think we'd call it joy. It seems to me like joy is a kind of antidote to coolness. Now, joy may turn out to be something other people admire that they think is cool. But yeah, I always tell my students, even when they're thinking about careers, do you actually enjoy doing what you're planning on doing, or do you like the idea of it doing it in the eyes of others? Let's not confuse one with the other. Let's not confuse the pleasure of the thought of myself doing this with the actual doing of it. If you really enjoy doing it, great, do it. But if you think you might enjoy the thought of yourself doing it as other people are looking at you, be careful, because that will lead you down a path that... So yeah, I find if this is really true, that hipsters really enjoy something deeply, then I think that can be a natural defense against the self-conscious that kind of turns that sour.
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes back to the Coldplay thing that you mentioned, because I think it's true that they do enjoy good things, but so often it's a very temporary enjoyment, because the minute Coldplay gets too big or too widely accessible or widely appreciated, then they move on, and this kid's like, well, I like them because they are good, but
Why do they move on?
They move on because it's no longer a privileged, esoteric thing that they hold. It's no longer, I mean, because power always comes into it, and they held Coldplay for a time as this unique cutting edge of value, and once everyone is privy to that knowledge, they have to move on to the next, you know, whatever the new frontier of valuable art is. So in the moment, they are appreciating and recognizing goodness in Coldplay, and often they're the first people to, because they're perceptive and they're keen on, you know, quality, so they're usually the first to the quality, but they're also the first to leave when it gets too mainstream, and that's lamentable, because I think what you're talking about of really taking joy in something, that lasts, and it's not going to be susceptible to falling away when it becomes too mainstream.
Just quickly, though, I mean, I feel like I'm becoming Fonzie's advocate tonight. Fonzie's advocate. Fonzie, you know. And maybe that's an unhip reference to a formerly hip icon.
Yeah.
You
just jumped the shark, man.
Yeah, I know, seriously. I do think, though, we come to enjoy, take delight in things authentically, largely because we hang out with people who delight in things. And so I think it's so Todd, I guess I wonder if it's a bit of a false ideal for me to, if you're saying that it's totally spontaneous that I enjoy something. I mean, there's something about the authenticity that needs to be there. So I don't want to fake it. But on the other hand, I mean, I don't know, my parents had this old Antonio Carlos Jobim album when I was growing up. And so we always listened to it in the car. I love it. I think it's really cool. I don't know what to say about it, but I love it because I listened to it growing up. There are certain kinds of music that, you know, if I never authentically like it, I think at some point this is the bad kind of cool. But if I begin to like something because my friends like it, I think I'm being human. So I think I want to be a little careful there, that not to expect. I think imitation is good. Even certain kinds of sideways glances can be good. Partly I want to say, well, who am I looking to? Am I looking to, someone in a magazine or the coolest kid in campus, or am I looking to my friends who I actually want to shape and form me? And if that's the case, then, so some of that I think can be fine and good.
I guess I would say that, and I think that's a good one. I think, you know what I would call that? I would call that friendship. When two people like a third thing, that is often the basis of friendship. So if that's the sideways glance, like, do you like this too? Because I like it. You find out they do. I mean, think of who you're friends with. You're often friends with people where you had a shared experience growing up. And what you do now is you sit back and often look back at, and you both admire that. Wasn't that a great time when? Or even now, if you both like the same music. I have friends that I did share things with in the past, and sadly, we're not as close. We're not alienated. But because our tastes have differed, we still are brothers. But, the third thing isn't quite as prominent anymore in our lives. So I do think it's a good to kind of, and I would call that friendship.
Sometimes apprenticeship too, though, maybe. So sometimes that we don't sort of simultaneously come to like something, but I think, Todd, I don't know anything about music, and Stan, I don't know. I'm going to listen to what you, oh yeah, I like Coldplay. That sounds pretty good to me. And so we put on, we take on the tastes of another for a while and try them on. And so, yeah.
My friend Jerry Root likes to say there are two kinds of people in the world. Here I am people, and there you are people. And he says, my life is an effort to be more and more of a there you are person, where when I walk in the room, my overwhelming concern is not that everyone appreciate and get the impression I want, where I can actually walk in a room and be concerned about others and be other focused. And the term that keeps coming to mind is we want to have a self-forgetful, a subconscious self-forgetfulness. There can be a self-forgetfulness that's so conscious that it's anything but self-forgetful, right? But to have a subconscious self-forgetfulness where my thoughts aren't dominated with the self-absorbed thought of my image all the time and how I'm being appreciated or understood, and I really can be focused on other people. And so I just, along those lines, really appreciate what Brett says here. He says, if Christian cool exists, it exists as sort of a happy accident, not as an intended consequence of careful planning and high-level marketing meetings, but as an unintended byproduct of a faithfulness to the gospel and an authentic community's outworking of that in everyday life. It's not about managing one's image or carefully selecting a color scheme based on months of market research, but about living lives that are loving, giving, sacrificial, righteous, and resurrection-minded. It's not about being conformed to the world, but being transformed, Roman 12 style, by the renewal of our minds. I just think that sort of thinking is such a great corrective. And that's what leads to the joy you're talking about. To be lost in wonder, love, and praise for the God who sent his son to die for us. Well, that's joy. And that moves me from center stage, puts him there, and enables me to not be consumed with myself all the time on a good day.
Wow. Well, it's getting late. It's time to roll up the scroll and put it back in its cave. Put it to sleep. Thank you so much for coming. I think our speakers will stick around to chat with you if you'd like for a few minutes. Don't forget to pick up the last books that are left on the table, only $14. You won't get them. If you have an iPhone, you've been checking Amazon, you're not going to get a better price than that. So tonight is the night to get the book. Special thanks to all of you for coming, especially Brett for writing this wonderful book that got us all thinking. Let's give him a hand. Let me close with a word of prayer. Our Heavenly Father, our great King, what a joy it is to serve you. What a joy it is to know that you reign and rule in our lives, Lord, and that our names are written in the Lamb's Book of Life. Whether we're hipsters or frumpsters, Lord, you love us so dearly. And Lord, I just pray that our passion would overflow towards you and would drive us to do great things for the kingdom by your power and for your glory. Father, thank you for bright minds, the bright minds who've joined us tonight, Lord, to comment on this great book. And thank you for Brett. May he have a fruitful writing career and illuminate us more in the near future. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks so much for coming.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit Biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.